Hey guys, this is me, Tyler here, Maverick Capitalist, and I'm going to discuss with everyone why I left the corporate world and why I don't plan on going back. I was working up until 2018 for UPS, a major logistics company, at which point I was fired. I actually have previous videos on how this occurred and was the reasons behind that. In that time span, from the time I lost my job, I applied to hundreds, if not a couple thousand, new corporate jobs, and it didn't go anywhere. To me, what I found out, and I even realized this when I was still at UPS, is that a lot of these quote corporate job openings aren't really job openings, or if they are, there's like 1,000 people going for one job, and sometimes they're just fake listings. They drop the job. I was just stunned because I was told by people, oh yeah, you can go find like another logistics job for a different company that will probably hire you, whether it be like DHL or FedEx or whatnot. And I realized that this was no way possible because of these applications I was putting in. I have a really stellar resume, fluency in multiple languages, and it was going nowhere. Eventually what I did is I just stopped applying. I realized I was going to have no success getting a new job of this sort. I started pursuing entrepreneurship, day trading. I was almost successful at launching a business with my brother. Unfortunately, none of this stuff took off in the 2 or 3 years from 2018 onwards. And then many people here know I was in Eastern Europe. I came back to the US in around 2021 because my financial situation had gotten pretty dire and I needed to find something else and just buffer up my finances. And I didn't have proper residency and whatnot in Europe. So I came back and I applied for a lot of corporate jobs again. I actually ended up getting some interviews with the likes of Boeing Aerospace, Airbus, Raytheon, Penske, some other kind of trucking logistic companies. And this time around, no job offers. It was like, for me, I just was like, this is absolutely pointless. There were other problems that I saw, like at this time you still had to take this jab, which I was not keen on. I never took the jab. I thought it was absolutely atrocious. Like, I didn't need it. I could understand if someone wanted to take it. So I just was like, this is not going anywhere. I probably did something like 15 interviews. I still remember one interview I did in person here with, I think it was Penske or Hertz here in West Florida. And I went in and I thought everything was great. The guy interviewing me was a black fellow, seemed to like my background. He had been a former guy in the Navy. And I was like, yeah, everything seemed to jive well, and then no job offer. And this is one of the biggest issues I found, like going through this whole interview process, how fake and how disingenuous these HR people were. They were just such liars. They would even act like you were almost onboarding with the job and then nothing would happen. Eventually I was like, okay, I'm just going to take whatever I can get, and I'm not going to pursue this whole corporate path because like some of the problems that I kind of alluded to along the way, these jobs are, there's hardly any of them for how many people are pursuing them, and they could still lay you off even if you get the job and you're performing right. If the finances, we saw these big layoffs with like Charles Schwab back 6 months ago, and you can get fired, laid off, or whatever you want to call it. I think in England they say that you're made redundant, but I don't want to go back in the corporate world. That was something I realized. If anything, I would rather just work for the US government, because at least with the US government, I think it's a little more stable, and I actually think the process is a little more fair in some ways, as surprising as some people may find. Look at the corporate agenda, so also stateside, it's like a total freak show. Like what they're looking for in these individuals, like they want the blue-dyed, lesbian, all these ism kind of words. That's the kind of people that they prefer hiring. Contrary to people I meet, they think that they still want this really polished white guy kind of look, and I'm like, no, they actually don't. Not if you read between the lines and if you do research into these companies and the inclusion agendas that they promote. They get incentivized by the government. There's huge packages in most of these industries for them to discriminate against straight white men. And that's just how it is. Even non-white men, I think they're, when you look at like Title IX or like affirmative action type of bills, I think it actually affects all men in general. in the States. The thing also is that there's no sense of being autonomous if you work for a company. I realized early on when I pursued the entrepreneurship path in Eastern Europe that it was very different. The mindset, the creativity, what you had to bring to the table was substantially more than if you're just working for someone. You might have to know a handful of individual skills real well working for a company, but there's kind of a joke I have, like the sales guys that work in companies or marketing guys or women, they've like literally never sold a product with their own brand or on their own. They've never actually sold anything, but yet they're classed as sales teams for companies. It makes no sense. But this is just how it works. These people, they don't have backgrounds. They weren't like entrepreneurs. They weren't hustlers in their past, but they're still classed as salespeople. It seems kind of crazy to me. Also, knowing how to create a brand, create a following is a big concept of entrepreneurship, which you're not going to cultivate working for a company. I'm going to be able to develop these skills substantially. Also, when you look at like the pay grades of these companies, when I look at like the salary I was making with like UPS, when I factor in inflation, what it equates to from like 2015 to 2018 is more or less around $65,000 to $75,000 a year. So it was a decent salary for someone in the early to mid 20s, but many of my coworkers in my department were like 20 years older than me, and they were still making the same salary as me. And I was like, I wouldn't want to be 30 or 40 years old making this kind of salary. I wouldn't be making like 150, 250,000. And that was just my thought process. Like, this seems really low. And that's the thing is, there's a term with jobs. It's called just over broke. People maybe have heard this term. It's an acronym, and that is what a job is. You're often just over broke. And even if you're in like a decent job, most of the decent jobs that are in bigger cities, it's going to be more expensive. The standard of living, you're never really going to be like balling it, you might say. And nowadays, a lot of people who have on paper decent jobs can't even afford to buy their own house or apartment. It's just atrocious how our government's been operating. They're not keeping rates of apartments and houses on par with what the cost of living is to like what jobs are paying. There's not a sense of parallelism. It's very disconnected. So the only real way that you can actually really get ahead is you either have to get really high up in one of these companies, or you have to do something on your own, whether that be like entrepreneurship, learn a trade, maybe be a day trader in the stock market. Something that's independent is really how you're gonna have to do it, because there's no caps on these jobs. There's no kind of like ceilings, and that was something else when I worked at UPS in my last year. Note here, I got terminated for totally different reasons. I'm not going to, that's a different video, but my boss told me that the director who was above him and the vice president, they actually knew about me, and they were getting really kind of irritated at how I was being paid. I was getting what were like monthly bonuses that were totally based on performance, and they were actually getting kind of fed up giving me these bonuses. They were actually at a point where the following year they were going to get rid of this like system. It was something that made me able to make around 20 to 30% higher salary. You know how bonuses work. It's anyone who's had this system. And that was something else that was kind of alarming for me. I'm like, okay, so I'm only making like $15,000 more per year, which it's decent. I'm 15 on, say, we'll just say 48,000 base salary. I mean, it would take me up to like 61 grand, which, no, this was like in 2017. I'm like, it's not really that big of a deal. Like, it's not like for how much input. Like, I'm on a monthly basis. I was literally in value giving, like, it was in the six figures of extra value to the company. So that didn't really make much sense. But like I said, when we saw it happen also during 2020, this forced jab, this was a very alarming thing for me, that all of these companies, you saw this with almost all the departments in the government, like teachers, military, etc. They were all forced to take this jab. I think for some people it was toxic. I think some of the mortalities that we've seen since 2020 have been totally or partially because of this. I was like, these companies, I mean, you are not autonomous. Like, if you're running your own like company or business, you could say, no, I'm not going to do this. Or if you're some kind of tradesman, and that kind of put in my head, I wouldn't even want to work for one of these companies. That was one of the stipulations, even if One of the companies I had interviewed for was Boeing Aerospace, and they were forcing people to take the jab until the point, like, I would have just been in kind of that cutoff range where I would have had to done it. And I didn't want to sell myself this short. I value my health and sanity more than just like an average or an above average paying job. It's not worth it. And like working in corporate like company environments, it's not very fun nowadays. Like, you have to deal with all these annoying women, weird people that are constantly harassing you. They're never going to be put in check, and the HR people are basically incentivized to demonize you as a straight white guy. That's just the nature of how companies work here in America. I don't know how it is in many other countries, but that is their modus operandi here in the US. It's terrible. And this is also why I think it's good to internationally diversify. I really promote this theme, this flake theory, on my channel. Henderson was kind of one of the big players in this flake theory concept here. Go where you're treated best. You want to look abroad. That's an issue. What I was trying to do in my 20s was plant my flags, get second citizenships in other places. And that's another thing. You're not going to be able to do this working for a company. Like, working as a normal employee isn't going to be possible. That was another big problem I saw working like in UPS. I was never going to be able to like work independently abroad. Even in positions that claim to be remote, often they don't allow you to work internationally. You have to be domestically located in the country that you're in. In some cases, even certain states you have to be within. You can't get into computer systems and whatnot if you're abroad. There's only a few select sectors where you can do this. In the area that I worked in, it wasn't like this. So I was like, I'm never going to be able to do like this job abroad, so I need to do something that's on my own, that's more independent. And there's other concepts that we're told about, like retirement, these like companies that will be really gracious to you for the long haul, which it doesn't exist nowadays. It simply is a fantasy of the past. These companies are not going to be loyal to you. They're not going to retain you out of the graciousness of their heart. Retirement, even for a lot of government workers, is not going to exist. Guarantee you in 20 years. These pensions are going to be either wiped through the funds, or the dollar is going to be so devalued, it's probably not really going to be worth a whole lot. Just my opinion here. I look kind of at the broad scheme of things, and for all the reasons I mentioned here, this is just the first part of this video. This is why I pursued this independent path, and why I, at this point, avoid corporate setups. Like, if it's my company that I'm establishing, like say here in the US or maybe like in Europe, but in this case, if this is a company I'm establishing here in the US, that's a different thing. If I'm running the company, if I'm the owner, CEO, etc., different situation. But like I said, it's so overhyped, overrated. Hardly any of these jobs exist anyhow, and you're probably gonna be the last guy that they pick anyhow, if you guys know who I'm referring to. So be aware of this. I look forward to all the feedback in this video here, and thank you.